once upon a time, there was a highway patrolman, doing his job, out there watching, seeing if anybody was speeding. Then he saw a car that was going way under the speed limit, dangerously under the speed limit. So he turned on the lights, followed the person, pulled them over, and when he got up to the front window, he saw it was an old lady. And so he asked, "Ma'am, did you know what speed you were going?" She said, "Why, yes, I was going the speed limit." And he said, "No, ma'am, the speed limit is 75. You were going 45. She said, "Well, I saw on the sign right there, it said 45. And he looked, and the sign said Highway 45. He said, "No, ma'am, that's a highway sign. It's Highway 45. You're supposed to be going 75. And he looked in the back, and he saw she had people with her, and they were all gripping their seats like this, white as a ghost. He said, "What happened to them?" And she said, "Well, we just got off of I-20. So I'm very excited to speak to you today. I guess I'll stand closer to the mic. I'm very excited to speak with you today. I'm also very nervous because I haven't preached in like 4 years. So I used to be a youth minister, so kind of one of the unwritten rules of being a youth minister was whenever the pulpit men are not there, get on up there, boy. So I have not gotten on up here, boy, in a long time. So hopefully I remember how to do this. But before we get to our lesson, I just want to say a quick prayer. So let's bow our heads real quick. God, thank you for this day, and thank you for everything you've given us. And God, I want to pray for this lesson today. And I pray that you give me the eloquence to say what needs to be said. Pray that you give me the understanding to reveal your scripture to us. And I also pray that you would lead me in the way that you want this sermon to go, to hit the points that I need to hit, and to say the words that people need to hear. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Well, today I wanted to, I guess it's a testimonial, but I kind of wanted to tell you the story of my family's faith. So I was born in Lake Jackson, Texas. My dad was very tall. My mom was very short, and I'm just kind of somewhere in the middle. And for the first 4 years of life, it was pretty good. I had everything I needed. I had 2 attending parents. I had all the toys I wanted. And then my sister was born, and that all ended. She's trouble. She still is. But I wasn't the only kid anymore, which was a bummer. But my mom was raised in a very devout house, and my dad was not. My mother's dad was an elder. I think mom or Nana was the librarian. I don't know. She was always at the church doing something, so she must have had some job there. But they were always at the church. But my dad's family didn't really go. My mom would get us up every Sunday morning, get us dressed, get us ready, get us fed, and take us to church, but Dad wouldn't come. It's not that he was against church, it just wasn't for him. He said, "Y'all can go, that's fine for you, but that's not something I'm interested in doing." And so Mom would get us up, she would take us to church, she would come back, Dad would be there, he might go out fishing, he might do chores around the house, he just didn't go. At night, Mom would read to us from the Beginner's Bible, the white Bible with all the people that are drawn the same way except their hair is different. But she would read to us from the Beginner's Bible every night. But Dad would not join. Again, it was for us, not for him. This went on for years in their marriage. And I can only imagine the kind of conversations that happened behind closed doors. But knowing my mom and knowing how patient she is, I can't imagine her berating him or making him feel guilty about his choices, or making him feel bad. But this went on for years. And I kind of have 3 chapters of my life, as if you will. And each chapter kind of has a verse that goes along with it. And Don just read these verses to us, but I wanted to look at 4 and 7 specifically. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. It rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. For 8 years, my mom embodied these verses. She was patient with my dad. She was not resentful or jealous towards the moms who had husbands there at church with her. She did not take out her frustrations. She was all these things. And eventually, when Dad started coming to church, this was his favorite passage. And I think the reason it was his favorite passage was because he realized that his wife had been living this passage for the 8 years of their marriage. So one day, my mom taught at Mom taught at the Christian school there in Sweeney where my sister and I attended. And one day she was called to the office by Miss Billy, the principal. And she said, I need you to come to the office. It's about James. And Mom starts freaking out. She's worried. She's a very anxious person. It's probably where I get it from. But she goes to the office and she sees Miss Billy, the principal. She sees John Orr, our preacher at Sweeney at the time. And she sees my dad, all 6'4" of him, huddled there crying in the principal's office. And all he could say is, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And he was apologizing for how he had been living, the choices that he had made, because he was convicted of what he was doing, and he said he wanted to be baptized. And this is a total shock, because if you remember, church was for us, not for him. So what happened? Well, apparently every night when Mom was reading the beginner's Bible, Dad was standing out in the hallway listening. He listened to the Bible stories. He listened to my sister and I ask questions. And he listened to the prayers that we said. And after 8 years of this, he realized that he was missing out on something. And so he wanted to be baptized. And I remember walking in church with Dad there for the first time. I remember I was so happy because I was like all the other kids who had Mom and Dad there. And suddenly things started to change. Dad's language around the house started to change. The way he treated Mom started to change. We started to have people over at the house for Bible studies a lot more. He started meeting with our preacher, John Orr, and he also started meeting with a younger Christian named Nathan Burrow who was going to the church. And they became, Nathan, even though he was younger than my dad, kind of took Dad under his wing. And I think it's interesting that it wasn't my mom's nagging that led to Dad wanting to get baptized. It wasn't her constantly saying Bible verses to him that convinced him he was wrong. It wasn't her Bible thumping or anything like that. It was just the simple act of reading the Bible out loud that eventually convinced my dad that he needed to be baptized. It was a patient, Christ-like stubbornness that eventually won Dad over. And I think we could definitely learn something from that. So, fast forward a year and some odd months. It is August 22nd, 1999, and I'm dressed in black, all funeral black. Because about a year before, in April 1999, my dad was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a very rare form of cancer that usually only attaches itself to children. But for whatever reason, it had attached itself to my dad. And for the years of 1998 and 1999, I watched my dad battle with this sickness. The treatments were just as aggressive and painful as the disease itself. The years of 1998 and 1999 were filled with late nights, sick mornings, trips to Houston to MD Anderson, and lots of heartache. But despite all this, Mom and Dad's faith just got stronger. I would come into the living room way after I was supposed to be in bed, and I would see my mom and dad kneeling in the living room praying together, reading the Bible together. I had always envisioned my dad like Superman, invincible, big, strong. But this cancer was his kryptonite. And I watched for 2 years as this cancer ate away at my dad. And I can remember the day my dad died. My sister and I were at the Christian school. And Nana and Pawpaw, my mom's parents, came to pick us up in their Chevy van. And they brought us home. And Mom met us outside and said, "Your dad has died." And I was very confused by this. Because as far as I knew, Dad's cancer had been in remission. That's what the doctors had told us. He was getting better. We saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought this was a trick because my dad liked to play tricks on me. And so I went to every bedroom in the house, and I pulled back the blankets, the comforters. I was looking for him, and I thought I found him in my sister's room. But when I pulled it back, it was just a pile of her Beanie Babies. This wasn't a trick, but it was a sick twist nonetheless. I don't remember a lot about Dad's funeral. I remember my sister running around with some friends, and she fell down and busted out her front teeth. I remember sitting in the front of the church and watching a mass of monochromatic bodies pass in front of me, offering me condolences, shaking my hand, giving me hugs. But I do remember one thing. I remember one person grabbing me by the shoulders, looking me straight in the eye and saying, "God needed your dad more." And church, I want to take a moment to say why this is one of the worst things you can say as a Christian. Because for 8 years of my life, I had done the good Christian boy thing. I had gone to church. I had read the stories. I knew the stories. I was doing all these good things to make God happy. And then this person looks me in the eye and tells me, the God that you've been working towards and for took your dad away just because. I was baffled by this idea. God took my dad away just because? Well, what about me? What about what I need? Who's going to take me fishing? Who's going to teach me to be a man? Who's going to teach me how to play basketball? Who's going to read books to me at night? Who's going to teach me how to ride my bike? Who's going to be my dad? As you can imagine, the idea that God had taken my dad away became like a cancer in my own mind. And it grew, and it festered, and it became worse. And I became an 8-year-old who hated God. And why shouldn't I? Everybody's telling me God took my dad away. Why shouldn't I hate this God? I became a kid with a lot of anger issues. I think I still grapple with those anger issues today. But let me tell you something, church, something that I've discovered is that God did not take my dad away. I know that now. God is far too wise and far too good to just do something like that. And we need to stop selling God short when we say things like this. I was raised in the church my entire life, but imagine if I had not. Imagine how these words would have rocked me and hurt me. I'm reminded of a time when my mom was talking to my younger brother. He was just babbling. He was just talking. And my mom, very patiently, very quietly said, "You know, Caleb, you don't always have to talk. And you know, church, we don't always have to talk." I understand why this man said this to me. He thought it was going to be helpful because he probably heard it at some time. He was trying to be helpful. And in our church tradition, we put such an importance on the knowing and the understanding and the being ready to give an answer in defense of your faith. But sometimes when we open our big mouths without thinking, we can do much more harm than good. Sometimes the best thing you can do when someone is weeping and grieving is to shut your mouth and to sit down next to them and to grieve and weep with them. Stop trying to explain God, an unfathomable being, with your limited vocabulary. During the time after Dad's death, Mom took on 2 jobs. She had been a teacher at the Christian school, but then she had stepped up to be the principal, but now she stepped back into a teacher role so that she could work at this little resale shop the next town over. Now, my mom is a very great woman. She is very small in stature, but she is towering in her height. Towering in her faith. She never gave up hope. And she took us to counseling. She went to counseling in a time when counseling wasn't really a thing that Christians talked about. But she never gave up hope. She kept going forward. And I can remember one day, we were having a Bible study, and one of the women that was at the Bible study asked Mom, "Are you ever going to remarry?" First of all, it was only like a year afterwards. Let the woman grieve. But second, she said no, because God is my husband now. And as a child, sitting there listening to this, that felt so stupid to me. It was so confusing. God isn't here to mow our lawn. God isn't here to help us carry in the groceries. How can you say that God is your husband? But as an adult, I'm humbled by the fact that not only that my mom said that, that she believed it. Let's look at Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. During this tragic time in our lives, God was working in ways that we could not see, and in ways that I didn't want to see. First, my dad's family was never devout. They probably only went to church on Easter, and very few Easters at that. But during my dad's final days, the faith that he showed rocked my dad's family. They started wondering, is there something to this Christianity? Is there something to having a church family to support you during hard times? And so, with him getting up and preaching sermons even when he was sick, with him writing letters of encouragement to his family, to people in church even while he was sick, my dad's family started to realize maybe there is something to this. And they eventually, during the days before Dad's death and the days after Dad's death, came to be involved in their own churches. And all of them are still today. Second, during my dad's final years, he became very good friends with, as I said, this man named Nathan Burrow. He was younger, but he was very smart, very wise for his age. He kind of became like a spiritual big brother to my dad. And not only that, but Nathan's parents, Vern and Cindy Burrow, became like spiritual father and spiritual mother. In fact, Dad called him my church mom and my church dad. And Dad had this little Christian family that kind of taught him how to be, that modeled what a relationship was supposed to be like. Because my dad's family was separated by divorce and remarrying and a lot of bitter feelings. And after Dad died, the men from Nathan and Dad's group of church friends started showing up around the house to help out. They mowed the lawn. They carried our groceries. They started helping take care of things around the house. But none of them did more for us than Nathan. Nathan was a student of ACU at the time, and he would spend his weekends by driving the 7 hours from Abilene down to Sweeney to be with us, to take care of us, to help us out, to give Mom a break, and then driving back Sunday night so that he could be at classes on Monday. Soon, Mom and Nathan started hanging out more. I started spending a lot more time with a babysitter for some reason. And the next thing I knew, Mom was telling me that Nathan was going to be my stepdad. And I remember I was in the kitchen when they told me this, and I was really confused because I really didn't want a dad who was going to step on me. And I said, I don't know if I want this. Mom and Nathan got married between a year or 2 years after Dad died. I don't remember a lot about the wedding, but I remember that I was supposed to walk my mom down the aisle, and about halfway down the aisle, well, that's all I remember. I think Mom carried me the rest of the way down the aisle. But Nathan became a preacher. We moved to Palacios, Texas, where he was a preacher. We eventually moved back to Sweeney, where he became the preacher at our home church. And Mom and Nathan had 2 baby boys, Micah and Caleb. And despite how it looks in this picture, I do love them very much. The years of 1998 and 1999 were the darkest years in my family's life. And yet, in spite of that, God still somehow managed to bring good out of it. I have 2 little brothers that I would not have if Mom and Nathan had not gotten married. I now get to call Vern and Cindy Burrow Papa and Mimi. It's weird saying, because I always say Mimi and Papa, but when I say their real names, I say Vern and Cindy. That's weird. Mimi and Papa, Cindy and Vern. Dad's side of the family came to be Christian. I came to learn about ACU, where I eventually came to go to college and got stuck. None of this would have happened if my dad had not died. Now, God did not wave a magic wand and suddenly make this horrible thing a good thing. My dad dying at 27 years old of cancer and leaving behind a wife and 2 kids is still a tragedy. I still carry trauma from it. But God still did something good, even through that and even after that. So even when you are going through trauma and tragedy, God is still good. Even when the church says things or does things to hurt you, God is good. Even when you're asking existential questions about faith and life, God is still good. Let's look at this last chapter, Jeremiah 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. 24 years ago, I could never have imagined where I would be now. Because 24 years ago, I was a boy who was very angry at God, wanted nothing to do with his church, and doubted that there was any good in the world at all. And I'll say this, church, anger at God is not a bad thing. And you probably won't hear that very much. But my anger at God compelled me to find my own answers. To figure out, how are these people saying God is good when I believe that he is not, and I've seen that he's not? But it led me to find out that God is good. It took me a long time. I was angry for a long time. But I eventually found the answers I was looking for. Now, don't hear me saying if you're angry at God, stay angry at God. Let that compel you to find your answers, to ask your questions. But also don't hear me saying that you need to speed that process up, because grief and anger are very personal journeys. And I would never ask somebody to speed that journey up. So I had lots of plans for myself over the years. I was going to be a cowboy rodeo star. I was going to be a rock star musician. I was going to be an astronaut. I was going to be a writer. Still hoping I get to do that one. But God had other plans for me. When I came to ACU my freshman year, I met a girl named Carrie Haley. And I knew Carrie from this camp that we went to when we were younger. And we were in Dr. Gumb's U100 class. And Carrie was a group leader. And she wrote her name and number up on the board. And I said, bet. And I typed it in. Because I didn't have a vehicle my first year of college. So I had no way to get to Walmart. So one day I texted her and I was like, sup, girl? Your boy needs some ramen. How about I borrow that car? And then 2 years later, we were married. 24 years ago, I would never have thought that I would be a teacher. They were way too old, and I was never going to get that old. I definitely didn't think I was going to be a youth minister or a song leader or standing up behind a pulpit talking to people about God. I can honestly say that if God had not put Carrie in my life, I would not be where I am today. I never would have left my dorm room. I probably would not have finished college. But God had other plans for me. "24 years ago, if you had told me that April 22nd was going to be anything but a day of misery and remembrance and loss, I would not have believed you. Because it was the darkest day in my family's history. It was a day when my dad, James Bailey White, died. But 4 years ago, Carrie went into labor at 1:30 a.m. And a couple of very stressful hours later, my son, James Bailey White, was born on April 22nd. God had different plans for me. Plans that I could not have seen and could not even have imagined 24 years ago. God was working in my life even when I could not see it, and even when I didn't want to see it. And God is like the sun. Even on overcast days, when it's cloudy overhead and you cannot see the sun is still there, still giving warmth, still shining. And sometimes it's hard for us to see that if the sky is overcast. But God is always there, always shining, always working towards good. So I need to apologize for lying at the beginning of the sermon, because I said that this was going to kind of be a testimonial of my personal faith. But really, it was not about me. This was a story about the faith of a patient woman. This is about the faith of a faithful man who, even though he was dying, still wanted good for his family and those around him. It was a story about how love can transform others' hearts and the effect that your faith has on other people. You know, now's the time where I say, if you want to put on the Lord in baptism, come on down and we'll dunk you in the water. But it kind of feels rote and, I don't know, almost meaningless to me. But if you do need to put on the Lord in baptism, you can. Or, if you have grief that you're struggling with, if you have anger that you're struggling with, if you want to talk to somebody about your problems, we have a family right here. And though we may not be blood related, we are related through the blood of the Lamb, and that makes us a family. And there's no better people to talk to about your problems than your family. Let's go ahead and stand and sing.